Hi, thanks for joining me today. My name is David Peacock, and I'm going to talk about a book that I finished, and the book is called Orson Welles, Volume 2 of Simon Callow's multi-volume biography of Orson Welles. This one is called Hello, Americans. I have reviewed the first volume, and you can find it on my channel. So this one begins with the Magnificent Ambersons, which was the film after Citizen Kane. In the beginning of this volume, Simon Callow goes through some things that applied to me, and one of them was that, you know, I love Orson Welles. I'm forever a fan of Orson Welles. Now, Simon Callow explains that because so many people have this attitude, have the attitude that I do, they get upset with some of Simon Callow's revelations or details about Orson Welles, and so they have kind of a cognitive dissonance because they have a pre-existing admiration of Orson Welles. I felt that the Hollywood system kind of screwed him over. The Hollywood system didn't appreciate Orson Welles. The Hollywood system mistreated him. That applies to me. So I had to confront myself. This is a very detailed biography of Orson Welles. Simon Callow is like a factual vacuum cleaner. I mean, this guy just got all the facts, you know, put them all together and laid out his case for what happened to Orson Welles. One of the main things that happened in this Magnificent Ambersons film was Orson Welles began at RKO Pictures with this film, and he had a lot of control over it, and he got everything pretty much that he wanted to do with the film. He got the Mercury players to be the cast. Those were his favored actors who he worked best with. After the film was finished, the United States entered World War II, and the United States government wanted to improve relations with South America to form allies against the American enemies. So they commissioned Orson Welles to make a film in South America. So right after Magnificent Ambersons was finished shooting, Orson Welles went to South America on this big project to do a film in South America. As Simon Callow lays it out, Orson Welles really screwed up. You know, he was lackluster on the editing of the film. He was preoccupied in South America. When he got to South America, the South American newspapers in Rio, he went to the carnival in Rio, and the South American newspapers loved him and exalted the famous American director who was in Rio to film the carnival. And so it was a big party, and he was meeting lots of women and betting lots of women, and he was really negligent in every single way. It was just a hedonistic orgy for him to be down there, to be famous, carnival, you know, alcohol, everything you could want. And as a result of that, or a lack of result, the film he was supposed to be shooting was mismanaged by him because it had lacked a purpose and it lacked clear and consistent leadership. And then the Magnificent Ambersons, they didn't like the edits that he had laid out, so they changed the whole film. So in the end, that was a big disaster. That's kind of the first part of the book, and you get an idea of how Orson Welles was so difficult. You know, he was a great artist, but Simon Callow is almost like a legal prosecutor laying out the case of what happened to Orson Welles. And he does a good job, and he's convincing. So let's go into a couple of things that I noticed specifically in the book that stood out to me. Okay, so one of the things that repeatedly happens with Orson Welles is he's a very creative and inspired and passionate creator. And when you're like that and you have a project like a film, money's no object. You just, you want to do everything you can to make this the best film ever. What happened with Orson Welles is that he spent way too much money in Rio. He had a lot to do with the failure of the RKO studio. That's really a heartless attitude that Orson Welles had, to ignore the studio's investment in him, to ignore the studio's promotion of him, and just be frivolous with all the goodwill that he had earned. Orson Welles just could not stand organization men, organizing things. Because though he would plan his films, he was very improvisational and a typical, and Hollywood has a lot of money at stake when they make these films. So they get very upset when things get changed around. So Simon Callow says nearly 30% of Citizen Kane was made after the end of principal photography. Many of the most famous sequences in that film were achieved by the use of special effects, all contrived in post-production. During the period of that process, Welles had made radical use in particular of sound, including music. His minutely detailed work with Bernard Herrmann was one of the most striking elements in the film, but much of his work and the work with special effects had been done slowly and painstakingly after the end of shooting. So you see, that's what happened in Magnificent Ambersons. He didn't put that post-production care. So it's important to realize, though, making a film, Orson Welles did the directing and he did the acting and he did the writing, but the post-production and the editing and the music and the special effects, they're really important in a film. Sometimes when I think of Citizen Kane, I just think of Orson Welles, but there are many other aspects of Citizen Kane that make it a success. So because he neglected these in Magnificent Ambersons, it's almost an incomplete film. It's of course the third reel is changed and they took out some very important scenes. It's really sad that that occurred when a man who had so much potential resisted this constraints that were put on him. So they did a preview in Pomona of Magnificent Ambersons and nobody liked it, and so then they drastically edited it, and it says three crucial scenes had been arbitrarily removed from the film without Welles's consultation. They had to reduce the length. They were trying for 90 minutes, so they went from 148 minutes to 90 minutes. So they cut out 58 minutes of film. So that's hacked up film. To RKO. So then back to the RKO. RKO basically failed. The guy who was the head of it loved Orson Welles, and Orson Welles really let down this guy who was the head of RKO. The film in South America became a disaster. There was a man named Lynn Shores who was one of the managers in South America, and he was reporting back to Hollywood of all of Orson's neglect. It's really a pretty interesting chapter where he builds this case against Orson Welles in South America. Orson always had another project going on, and he made one called Journey into Fear. He made other films, and then, let's see. Well, I've seen several of Orson Welles' films, and it really makes a difference if you have seen films like Magnificent Ambersons, and later we're going to get to Lady in Shanghai. It really makes a difference when you read these chapters if you've seen the films in advance. It's not necessary, but it does enhance the book. Another film that you could see would be The Stranger. So at one point, Orson Welles had a column in a New York Post. You know, there's a section on that, and it was kind of interesting. Callow lays it out, and he's a little critical because Orson Welles was very opinionated and had these strong progressive opinions associated with the FDR's vice president, Henry Wallace. The column took a lot of Orson Welles' time, but I think one thing that Callow could have said was that for an actor to have a substantial job as a newspaper columnist is really extraordinary. If you think about all the actors you know, women and men, it's hard for me to think of one now that is so intelligent and so concerned about America that they could write a column for a newspaper. Now, I guess you could put some of these latter actor politicians like Reagan and Schwarzenegger as actors who could adapt to other professions, but they're very rare. They're very rare, and I actually give Orson Welles a lot of credit for being a columnist. About the end of the columns, when he's summarizing Orson Welles on the soapbox in his column, and he says that because Orson Welles was so into what he was saying, he offended many people the way he said it. Callow has a great summary. He says, Welles had ceased to be interested in form and was concerned only with content. So that was a very good summary. Then we moved to Orson Welles went to New York City, and he put on this show, Around the World in 80 Days. Goes through the whole production. That was a really well done chapter. And here's something that Callow says about Welles. He rarely emerged the winner in his dealings with skillful operators, especially those who played a long game. And that's a very good conclusion about Welles. You know, he just, business people and corporate people, he refused to prioritize their contribution and their significance when he was making a show. Then he had a radio show, and once again he had difficulties with sponsors. And here's pretty much a summary of the book. Welles at heart was an experimenter. Everything was an experiment. You know, if he did a movie, he was trying to do something that had never been done before. If he did a musical, he was trying to do something that had never been done before. If he was trying to do a column, never do something that's never been done before. You know, and so entertainment's a business, and they want it to be predictable, and they want it to be able to, they want the entertainment, they want their advertisers to be able to feel comfortable in their sponsorships of these productions. So it's not really the place for experimenting. You know, experimenting is a very risky attitude. You know, all these kind of entertainments are risky, and Orson Welles was comfortable with a higher level of risk. than other people. Then he moves on to Lady of Shanghai, and as I said, see this film because, of course, Orson was married to Rita Hayworth, who starred in this film, and though Callow does give us factual accounts of Orson Welles and Rita Hayworth's relationship, he doesn't have a lot of specific descriptions of encounters of the two. I think Callow was trying to avoid that type of personal gossip. But I was actually very interested in knowing more about Orson Welles and Rita Hayworth's marriage. Then Callow finishes up with Orson Welles' Macbeth, and this is an interesting chapter. I'm actually watching Macbeth, is on YouTube right now. So those are the things that stood out to me when I was reading the book. It's amazing accomplishment what Simon Callow has done, and right now we're so lucky that I can go on YouTube and I can see some of these films. I can hear lots of Orson Welles radio broadcasts. I can hear his radio commentary. We're so lucky that we can use YouTube to find a lot of these things. It's just overwhelming how much stuff there is by Orson Welles. So that's my review of the book. So thanks for watching.